Hi guys, so in this video I want to talk to you about what I consider my three pillars of sense making. Now if you don't know who I am and this is your first time on the channel, my name is Michael Millerman. I graduated from the University of Toronto in 2018 with my PhD in political science. I've been translating the books of a Russian political philosopher named Alexander Dugin for a long time. I published several of my translations over the years, and I'm really interested in the history of political philosophy and the relationship of philosophy to politics. Okay, now my three pillars of sense making, if you want to think about it that way. The first one is philosophy. Now, by this, I mean foundational, fundamental inquiry into the basic components of our life, of the cosmos, of our thinking capacity and faculties. So philosophy is somehow understood as pure philosophy, metaphysics, ontology, first principles, and all that kind of thing. Like, are there rules of thinking? And if there are, what are they? What's the relationship of thinking to being, if there is one? Is to be one and to be the same thing? Okay, so that's kind of your, properly speaking, purely philosophical inquiry. Okay, but I don't think that all by itself, that's enough. And there are two other pillars that, in my view, are necessary to sort of triangulate when you're trying to make sense of the world. So the second one is politics, or you could say political philosophy. Now, this is where we kind of take all of the rigor and depth and passion for wisdom that we have in the first pillar, and we apply it to the world of political life. What is law? What is justice? What's the balance between what's good for me and what's good for you? What's good for me and what's good for everyone? What's the status of communities of various kinds? Family, nation, tribe, empire? In what sense should we or shouldn't we be bound by our linguistic communities? And partially that's a question that overlaps with reflections on the nature of language as such. Should we aim in our political life at what? Equality, freedom, excellence, empire, honor, conquest, immortality, glory, heroism? And if it's any of those, what kinds of heroism? Who should be our heroes? What does it mean to have a hero, to pick a hero? What does it mean to be a hero? So, okay, we have to have some concern with political philosophy, with politics, with the realm of the political community, because that's kind of the water in which we move, you know? Like, it matters. This is the thing that you dispute over and debate over. Policies, politicians, spending. Should we have 5 times more immigrants than we have, or should we close the door to immigrants completely and deport the ones that we do have? Well, you got your natural reaction to that, but you also have kind of thinking through what's implied by all of those possible positions, assumptions, emotions. And in many cases, the people who are the greatest philosophers in terms of, as it were, pure philosophy, they're also the most helpful in thinking about political philosophy. They often have books dedicated to each of these. So for example, Hegel has a book on philosophy of right, which teaches you something about politics, but he also has a book on logic, which teaches you something about the mind of God before God ever created a world. Okay, if you're Hegelian expert and you didn't like my formulation, don't worry about it. I'm just trying to convey the gist of the fact that these different books address different realms or different domains. Okay, and the philosophers will address political life in a philosophical spirit and with an eye to understanding the nature of political things. Okay, Aristotle's got a book, Metaphysics, and he also has a book called The Politics. All right, so that's kind of what I mean. So on one hand, you have the pure philosophy, so to speak, which seems like it's really distant from our basic political concerns. Then you have the realm of politics, our concern for it, political theory, political science, political philosophy, everything that begins to raise these foundational questions about our life lived together in political communities. And the third pillar, this is actually the one that I started with in my own intellectual journey before I ever studied Plato, before I ever studied Aristotle, before I took an interest in Heidegger, well before I'd ever heard of Dugin. And that is broad umbrella here, a term that's going to capture a lot of different things, but still, you can identify it as one, mysticism. So mysticism, political philosophy, and philosophy. Mysticism, politics, and philosophy. That's my system for triangulating in meaning making, sense making, interpretation. And there are a lot of reasons for that. So mysticism, let's give you a simple introduction, simple presentation, simple sort of overview. Mystics are those who seek union with the Almighty, union with the Absolute, union with God, some sort of self-transcendence, going beyond the limited confines of their psychological self, going beyond the limited experience of their empirical self. So you eat, you sleep, you bathe, you brush your teeth, you do all these things, you feel hunger, you feel thirst, you have sex. Okay, some of you do, some of you don't. And all of the sorts of ordinary parts of life that you experience, that's one thing. But then, you kind of have this, let's say, subconscious. I'm not telling you what this is. I'm not telling you that this is what mysticism is, but I'm getting there. Okay. You have your dream world. You have your sort of reveries. You have your sometimes sense of destiny or fate. You have the still small voice, things that are a little bit removed from your empirical self, things that are a little bit deeper and more mysterious than even your daylight psychological self, parts of you that are hidden to you, concealed from you, deus absconditus, okay, the hidden God in you and above you. So mysticism is this longing to have an immediate somehow encounter with the divine. And there are different forms and there are different experiences, and yet there are commonalities. And the thing that set me off in my intellectual journey later in life when I started to study philosophy proper was this weird intuition that I had reading the mystics, which was that you had a Jewish mystic here, an Islamic mystic here, a kind of contemporary beatnik, hippie, psychoanalytic mystic here. You had systems of symbolism like tarot, astrology, alchemy, and there seemed to be a kind of commonality underneath the mystical experience. They seemed to be translating into the language of their given religious tradition what seemed kind of on the surface to be a similar experience. So somebody talked about, experiencing the mysterious light of Tabor. That's a reference to Orthodox Christianity. Somebody talked about the discovery of the hidden Imam. That's kind of Shia Islamic figure that you sometimes see. Somebody had a kind of oceanic feeling, which Sigmund Freud analyzed in his own way. But everybody was attesting to the possibility of a certain sort of self-transcendence, the discovery of a kind of hidden root or reality, one that is closer to ourselves than we ourselves are, one that is more intimate to us than anything else. It's a whole realm of mystical territory somehow that these people discover. And then they have a very hard time. This is another commonality, generally speaking, among the mystics. The experience itself is ineffable. It's very difficult or impossible to communicate. And yet you are so inspired to try to evoke it in other people and to try to put it into language, to try to give it its due, to sing the praises of this loving bond with the absolute or with God. And so the mystics end up developing a very beautiful language of symbolism and of allegory, as well as a kind of linguistic operation where the formulations are meant to be evocative. Okay, the mystic's language is in part designed to take you to the brink of the mystic experience. Sometimes it's like that. Okay, so they are masterful technicians of language. I think it was Jose Ortega y Gasset. Is that how you pronounce it? Gasset? Jose Ortega y Gasset, who said that he said something like the mystical thinkers or the mystics are the true technicians of the word. In other words, they have learned to use language to its limits, to its extent. Something that attracts me about Derrida, by the way, he has this in common with the mystics, even though somehow he doesn't have that transcending the liminal experience that they have. But this folding language in and around itself in order to evoke kind of threshold experiences, I think he does have to a certain extent. But he invokes them within language, whereas the mystic takes one step outside of language and then comes back in to try to get you across that divide. So philosophy, politics, mysticism. Now, why do you need mysticism? I think there are a lot of reasons. I mean, the religious symbolism comes onto the table, not through philosophy proper and not through political philosophy, but through the mystical tradition. That's where you can begin to think somehow about the structural similarities between politics and spirituality. The whole language of angels, of demons, of conversion experiences, of fallenness, of the dark night of a soul, of redemption. You could say that under mysticism, I include theology, okay? Reflection on basic arguments and concepts concerning God and doctrines and dogmas. But even more so, again, for me personally, in my teaching and my thinking and my learning and in my life, it's the mystical tendencies within any religion that have been the most revealing. Now, sometimes you combine these things. You take a mystical approach to philosophy, and you see that, okay, philosophy has a certain sort of ascent built into it. It's a purification, a moral purification, intellectual purification. And somehow the peak of that ascent is a kind of mystical rapture. Now, you don't have to believe that, but if you're trained in the texts of the mystics, you begin to see it in the works of the philosophers. Maybe not all of them, but many of them. I'll give you a quick example. Right now, I happen to be reading Julius Evola, the Tantra of Power, I think it's called. And he's setting out the basic notions of Tantric Buddhism. And as I'm going through that, and as he's talking about certain specific yogic operations, certain, let's say, acts of concentration that are designed to concentrate your faculties in a way that makes you open to subtle spiritual realities, there are parallelisms. Now, I'm not saying they are equivalencies, but they are illuminating parallelisms, to my mind, between some of the operations he's describing and something like Descartes' meditations, which, if you know anything about Descartes' meditations, it's an operation that you are invited to perform in which you suspend the question of the reality of the external world in order to see whether there's anything that you can know for sure. And the idea is that you can't even know mathematics for sure, because it's possible that you've been tricked into believing that the mathematical laws hold and all of this sort of thing. Okay, we're going to talk about Descartes on a separate occasion, but in order to have the possibility of exploring the parallelism, you have to know Descartes and the other side of the equation here. It happens to be, as I say, this book on Tantric Buddhism is making the connection for me. But it's also the case that in, for example, Hegel, it helps to know some references to mysticism because he himself had referred to mysticism. There's a book, for example, Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition, which makes this point, and where Hegel says that reason is the rose on the cross of the present, referring to Rosicrucian teaching. So there's that sort of historical side that philosophers had been interested in the esoteric, interested in the occult, interested in the mystical, but there's also the presence of the mystical attested to somehow implicitly or explicitly in their writings. For me, to repeat, this was crucial when I read Hegel. It's crucial for me as I read Heidegger. You know, I have this book here, Contributions to Philosophy of the Event, which I have a course on and teach often in private tutoring and read and reread, if you can see how dog-eared that is, underlined all over the place. And unlike Being in Time, this book, Contributions to Philosophy of the Event, is in a way to be read as a kind of mystical initiation manual. Heidegger writes about the invisible ring enclosing those whose questioning is answered by the intimation of being. The invisible ring, okay? And he talks about kind of mystical figures, okay? Figures that are familiar from not just figures, but structures and patterns and things like that, that remind you more of mysticism than of like academic philosophy or pure philosophy or system philosophy, something like that. So, okay, I thought that I would just share this with you. 3 pillars in a way. I kind of went in reverse order because for me, mysticism was first, then philosophy. So when I started reading my first proper books of philosophy and Philosophy 101 so many years ago now, it was like, oh, yeah, okay, I see it, right? This is obvious. The mystics need philosophy because philosophy kind of is everything that can be articulated up to and just shy of the mystical experience. And the philosophers need mysticism because they can say everything except for that sort of last final moment. You know, that final captivating, enrapturing self-transcendence that you get attested to by the mystics is missing from the philosophers who don't realize that mysticism is their capstone. I'm telling you what I thought as a first-year undergraduate, okay? That, oh yeah, obviously, philosophy and mysticism complete each other. It's like it, how could you not see it? And the missing piece for me of this a trifecta the emphasis on political philosophy, on the distinctly important and central somehow phenomenon of political life in our self-understanding, that was a function of my discovery of Leo Strauss, the great Leo Strauss. Okay, I give a lot of credit to Leo Strauss as the greatest teacher in our time of the history of political philosophy. He left an incredible legacy in his students, and I can't imagine how I would have developed in my life but for Strauss's work on the history of political philosophy, which was so meaningful to me. And you could say, if I had to distill his insight into a single short statement here, Strauss showed in many different ways that in some sense, political philosophy is the heart of philosophy. You can't just jump to what is being, what is thought, what is unity, what is truth. You can't just jump straight into that deep end. And all the more so, you can't really go into the crazy extremes of mystic reflection on cosmogenesis, anthropogenesis, divine union with the Almighty, which is one of the names of a work by Al-Ghazali, I believe, right? Divine union with the Almighty, or mystical union with the Almighty. You can't quite go there right away. You risk jumping over like a hugely important preliminary step, which is reflection on our world. What is the relationship between philosophy and the political community is a question that you can't answer on the basis of pure philosophy, but that is kind of fundamental for self-reflection and self-understanding, because you philosophize in the heart of and in the midst of a political community. So if I just randomly start saying, oh yeah, all law is unjust, well, I could get, locked up and whatever, put in jail or killed by my neighbor or many other things, not by my neighbor, hypothetically, okay, all kinds of things can happen. So here's this sort of syllogism, if philosophy is self-knowledge or must be concerned with self-knowledge, and if the relationship between the philosopher to the non-philosopher is a crucial component in self-knowledge, then, political philosophy, which deals with that relationship, is an integral part of philosophy proper, because it's an integral part of self-knowledge. If you skip over it, if you belittle it, if you diminish it in some sense, then you're missing something fundamental, truly fundamental. And then, the mysticism comes into the picture where it's like, okay, fine. At the same time, and by the same token, if you philosophize, meaning you somehow, okay, there are many different ways of characterizing what it means to philosophize, but if you're interested in sort of the purification and intensification of intellectual activity through questioning what you regard as basic fundamental concepts, truths, or essences, or you're trying to have some sort of comprehensive grasp of the whole, which is another thing that philosophy is and tries to accomplish and longs for, well, you have to take into account what the mystics claim to have experienced, because they claim to have somehow consummated that loving longing for a grasp of the whole, or that loving longing for the source of truth, of goodness, of light, of beauty, of life. That divine spark in us isn't just awakened in them, it becomes an all-consuming fire. Then again, Heidegger calls philosophy an all-consuming fire. So you begin to wonder how all of these things relate to one another. Well, okay, that, as I said, gives you, in a nutshell, okay, a 20-minute nutshell here, 3 pillars of sense-making, in my view, roughly stated. I'm not reading notes here, I'm just talking to you. Philosophy, mysticism, and politics, meaning political theory, political science, political philosophy especially. All right, we just take all of that right now as an undistinguished whole. And later, if you want to know what the difference is between all of those different approaches to politics, we could talk about it. But for now, philosophy, politics, mysticism. And yeah, I'd love to know what you think about that. Let me tell you a possible objection. Let me anticipate a possible objection here. I'm not saying that no other approach to society and man can teach us anything, like anti-economics, anti-psychology, anti-sociology, anti-history, anti-literature, only politics, philosophy, and mysticism help us understand the world. Obviously not. That's not what I'm saying. Okay, you could have insights into the world through economics, through sociology, through literature, through the study of languages, okay, philology. All of these kinds of things can teach you something. As I'm sure, evolutionary biology, clearly you can learn something relevant to yourself and the world through those many lenses. But somehow when I look out at the meaning-making apparatus commonly represented among intellectuals, public intellectuals, and other sorts of scholars, I would say that these are the three conspicuously missing dimensions, or sometimes you have one or two, but not all three of them. So there are people you can find online, meaning makers, who do know something about philosophy and they do know something about mysticism, but there's this sort of glaring, gaping hole where an emphasis on the political should be. Or, they're politics, but somehow the two wings of philosophy and mysticism are not quite operative. Okay, so this is the sense in which I call them my meaning-making pillars, or sense-making pillars, why I think a triangulation could be helpful. Mysticism and philosophy, they give you something, but they overlook something. Politics and philosophy, they give you something, but they overlook something. Politics and mysticism, also, yes, that's where you have your whole language of end of times, apocalypse, eschaton, catechon, all these sorts of amazing eschatological reflections on the religious significance of politics. But hey, don't forget to put, as it were, the rigor and the acuteness and the depth of pure philosophy into the mix. All right, so hopefully that's something. I just thought I'd sit down and shoot this video for you, give you a rough sense if you have any interest in how I come to these questions and sort of what I try to represent on this channel, because that's what it is. Okay, that's what it is. In the background of everything I do on this channel is what I just told you, the idea that we need all three of those. And, I may as well just take this occasion to say, for those of you who aren't sure, why do I sometimes discuss right-wing thinkers, or if you have come to expect that, why then at other times do I put Derrida on the table? And it's in this spirit as well, in the spirit of a comprehensive grasp. You want to know the comprehensive spectrum of political theory and all of its possibilities. And I observed in my years as a graduate student and subsequently that you tend to get a pretty, how could you put it? Not reliable, but if you want to find the liberal perspective on a question, you can pretty much find it. And if you want to find the leftist perspective on a question, you could pretty much find it. And when I was a student at university, I just imagined to myself, if I asked a classmate, name 5 liberal thinkers, they could do it. If I said, name 5 leftist thinkers, they could do it. But if I said, name the 5 most outstanding right-wing thinkers, I don't believe that they could do it. Maybe they would mention Nietzsche. Maybe they would mention Heidegger. And then I think they'd be at a bit of a loss. And so in order to kind of fix that imbalance, in order to restore the proper weight, and in my opinion, also the proper dignity to the spectrum of political thought, it's necessary to restore the part that's conspicuously absent. If it's the case that all we knew was right-wing thinkers, all we'd ever read together, all we'd ever heard about from cradle to grave was right-wing thinkers, and nobody had studied a liberal thinker and nobody had studied a leftist thinker, then it could very well be the case that I would be championing the study of them. Okay, because what's the ultimate goal? Again, the ultimate goal, my ultimate goal, okay, you may have other ultimate goals, but my ultimate goal and the goal of this channel is to help you to think and help myself to think and help you to think more deeply, more clearly, and more comprehensively about what it is to be a human being, what it is to be a member of a political community, okay, and what it is to be an embodied soul or a divine spark or whatever it is that we are, if we are one. And, that's why we look out at these fields, in order to get the whole story about the human situation. Philosophy, mysticism, politics, they all play a part. And so does the need to cast a big, broad glance at the spectrum of political theory, not just shutting off this side. Now, it's true, polemically, that I do sometimes do it from the right towards the left. I say they're degenerate or clown world or whatever the case is. That's true. I think on a policy level, that often is true. At a philosophical level, it's important to show due dignity, which I try to do, for example, in my videos on Derrida. So that's that. I hope that you've enjoyed this little overview, learned something from it. I'm sure that many of you will disagree with something that I said, in which case, please feel free to have it out in the comments. And if there's something I said that you think rings true, I'd love to know that as well. Again, my name is Michael Millerman. I teach online at millermanschool.com. I write at millermanschool.substack.com. Find something you like, subscribe, share, and all the rest of it, and I will see you in the next video.